Slippery elm is something that should be in every home. Slippery elm is something that you can live on. It is a food of foods. It is great. I got to tell another story I generally tell along with this one is when we forget to say, "Thy will be done." As I've said, whenever I interview a patient, whether it is just to speak to them or to do assistance in some way, I always have a silent prayer. My patient doesn't know that I'm praying, but a silent prayer that I'll have the Lord's help in whatever I do. When I was taken from the orphans' home in Salt Lake, the people who lived in the house next to us up on J Street in Salt Lake City, the Middaws, I'll never forget them, because I was a little guy. I went there when I was 14 months old, and I stayed there until we moved, and I was better than 3 when we left. But I remember Mrs. Middaw. She was a tall, stately woman with long auburn hair, a beautiful soul, and she had 2 teenage children. Well, they had an afterthought, and a small little guy came, a little girl, and just a baby, a toddler. And those teenage kids just about spoiled this toddler silly. They just loved her to death. But one day, the little child got sick. And the mother got the doctors in, and the doctor said, it is an incurable, and there is absolutely nothing can be done for this child. And Mrs. Middaw, a powerful woman, she said, "Don't tell me that. That child will live." And they said, "Oh no. It's just got a day or 2. Mrs. Middaw said, "Get out." And she called in the elders. And she said, "I want you to minister to this baby." And they did. And they used the same expression, "Thy will be done." If the baby is here and the job is not done, let it stay in health. But if its job is done, then take it, if it be thy will. And she screamed, "The Lord's not going to take that baby. Nobody's going to take it. It's my baby, and it'll live." The baby lived. The baby lived. We moved away. I saw the baby again when it was 40 years old. It was still one that would say, "Mama," and could toddle along, and the mother would still have to hold it by the hand. It wore diapers. It weighed 200 pounds. And Mrs. Middaw was strapped with this baby because that child would not even look at anybody else. It wouldn't tolerate anybody else. It was Mrs. Middaw that had to take care of it. And Mrs. Middaw didn't have long auburn hair now. She had scraggly white hair down over her shoulders. Most of her teeth were gone, and she looked like an old witch. Curvature of the spine, and she would go along crippled, and that baby, which was now about 250 pounds, would come along, "Mama." But she was tied to that baby. When that baby was 45 years old, the good Lord was kind enough to figure that Mrs. Middaw had paid her way, and the baby died. Mrs. Middaw just lived several days, and she was allowed to go. Thy will be done. If for no other reason than you're here for one thing, and that is to learn. We're not the big John R. That's what I was for many years. I could take care of anything. Sure. I'm a pretty little guy right now. And remember, thy will be done.
Could you use the slippery elm for burns, that sort of thing?
Yes, it's great for burns. Slippery elm has done so many miraculous things. Slippery elm is one of our greatest herbs. and I could very gracefully spit at the FDA. Oh, excuse me. We see things a different way. They have forgotten the case of wholesome herbs, and they take a specific out of each herb that they don't want on the market, and they find out that that specific is dangerous, and they outlaw it. And if they only had brains enough to know that that specific, when it's mixed with the other minerals and vitamins, becomes valuable.
Would you use the same procedure for a burn on a small child?
I'll go into burns with our next herbal formula.
Is that what the herbs that the FDA has banned?
There are 29 that are on the list. They are not definitely banned yet, but they are on the suspension list. And any time the finger is snapped, they are now legally unusable. I beg you, on these herbs that are so needed by mankind, put them away, stock them up. That is not hoarding. That is prevention.
When you use the mulberry marshmallow for gangrene, you always use the top and the root together, or just
Use the whole thing.
always the whole thing?
Yes. The marshmallow, you use the whole thing. You see, the marshmallow root goes 3 to 3.5 feet down into the earth. And while it's down there, it is a potent piece of equipment. It is twice as strong as the top part itself. Just a key for you. A marshmallow root is difficult to get. Now, if you can remember this, it might be valuable. When you go out into a field and there is a lot of marshmallow, and out where we live, it's a companion, we know it. You take the hose and put it at the top of the marshmallow plant. And where does the water go? It follows the root down. And then you go to the next plant, and the next plant, and the next plant. And by this time, you go to the first plant. You're full of it, sneaky, but you got the root and all. So during irrigation time, where people irrigate their crops, this is a good time to pull marshmallow. And you can get the root and all. But if you're not going to use it right now, rinse it off. Chop it into small pieces, because it gets just as hard as mahogany. So, yes.
I understand from what you said before, you can't store herbs over a year. How can you hoard these things if you can't? Herbs lose their potency. What would you do then?
Herbs, with the average packaging, a year is about their lifespan. After that, in their wholeness. And then we ask you to increase the dosage. But we can take these same herbs and we can put them into a can, a honey can or something of this type, and put the lid on, but push them down and get all the oxygen out we can, and then hermetically seal them by putting wax on the bottom. Not beeswax, it's too expensive, but regular petroleum wax. What do you call it? Paraffin. I wish I'd have said that. Paraffin wax. And then it's sealed. And the oxygen can't get into it. And you've got a lifespan there of several years.
Could you make them into a concentrated form? I mean, fermentations and...
Oh, definitely. Yes, you can make syrups, you can make tinctures, you can make all types of things of this type and hold them and ointments, yes.
I dry celery every year because where we are, you know, we don't get celery that easy. But I have celery that is 6 and 7 years old, and the chlorophyll is still as green as what I did last year.
Now, how did you store it?
But I do everything with the moon. And then I put it in crowns, you know, glass. But it never leaves the chlorophyll if you do it, and it never gets moldy. I pick on the right moon, and I never put it away until it's the right moon.
All right. Now, do you dehydrate it?
Well, and I do everything by air. We have very large home, and over the top of the cupboards, I put on and then cheesecloth, and then after they're cleaned, I lay it on top and put cheesecloth over the top. But I dry a lot of things, and I never had one thing mold.
All right, now here's something good. If you'll just listen to this, it's excellent.
But I have to figure it out every month with the moon, because I'll never take it down unless it's a dark of the moon in a dry sign, which is Leo, Aries. It's all the dry air signs, okay? And then it has to be taken and stored when in the middle of the day, when the sun is high, but it cannot be a rainy or moist day or high humidity, and you'll never mold anything.
All right, you got some knowledge here now. Listen to it carefully. Yes.
Doctor, how long do you think these capsule herbs will last in plastic bottles?
The capsule herbs are put in dark colored bottles, you'll notice. But if they are left in their carton and put in a dark place, they are good for several years.
They are.
Definitely so. Several years. Watch this, folks, because we talk about the light and the dark of the moon. I always say, people say, what'll I do for my daughter? She has shingles. I always say, lay your shingles in the dark of the moon, because in the light of the moon they curl up. But that's a different type of shingles. But
I do mine, I always have canning, anything I do is with the moon, and we have one.
with the moon is correct. We have now colleges, Duke University and various other places, that are testing by planting with the light and the dark of the moon. And they are bringing out terrific crops. In the dark of the moon, of course, we plant our tubers, and in the light of the moon, we plant our things that grow above the ground. And when we reverse those, we have the most beautiful tomato plants and the lousiest tomatoes. Or we have just the opposite. We have the most terrific roots on our peas and no peas. So do it with the light and the dark of the moon. It's extremely important.
And when you do with, even if you do with the light of the moon, you have to be sure you can transplant anything if you do it in the sign of Cancer or a water sign, and nothing will ever fall over or die. It just strikes right up.
I can vouch for that, she's right.
All right. Okay. Now, you see, we talk about herbs. And the study of herbs goes in a lot deeper than just the word H-E-R-B-S. It goes in a lot deeper because as you work with a group like this and listen, a lot will rub off. This is where there is power. In unity there is power. And so just listen in. Don't ever miss storing away your slippery elm powder or your bark. Put it away and keep it by the pounds. We will now go on to another series of herbs. Yes.
I just have one question. Why did you choose slippery elm to fill the hole in the side of the baby instead of something like comfrey?
Well, here, we're not through. We'll stay with this one. Slippery elm has a peculiarity. It has a little godliness about it. And there are cases now at the Hahn Mill massacre where the individual's hip was shot off. The woman prayed, and she was shown to use slippery elm, the bark, and she built up slippery elm bark over that area that had been shot off, and a new hip joint and a new leg and a new flesh came in with no scar. Yes, I have some of the original manuscript on this. These things show you that the power of God is great. And the slippery elm has the ability of building new flesh, and there is no ash or waste. It works. So this is why with any of our sores and things of this type, your slippery elm is precious.
Another thing it's really good for is if you have the tablets that these herb people put out, to let it melt in your mouth for the throat. It takes care of that scratchy, sore throat.
Yeah, slippery elm lozenges, they have been used for a long, long time. In fact, I think I have some in my pocket. I generally carry, yeah, there's one of them there. Yeah, thank you. Yes, they work very well. Let's go now to what I figure is God's gift to the world, comfrey. You know, up until 1955, there was no comfrey grown in the United States. There's no comfrey grown here at all. I know the man who brought the first comfrey roots over from Europe. Of course, the Russian says that he invented the Ford car, and he invented this and he invented that. He also says that the Russian is the one that discovered comfrey and started the use of comfrey. And it's true. It starts with Russia. And that's our first history of comfrey, is in Russia. And it went on down into England and France. And when I first practiced, I would have to ship in any comfrey that I needed for my patients from Europe. But they perfected it. They took some of those heavy spines off of the leaf and made it a little better type comfrey. But there is a plant, comfrey plant, that should be in everybody's yard. And it'll grow at not nearly any temperature there is, because I know of ranchers in Africa and ranchers in South America and ranchers in other hot places at 110 to 120 degrees have good stands of comfrey, and we know that it will not winter kill at 65 below zero. So it has a wide lifespan. But you know, the root will go down. It has a tap root. It has a number of roots. But it has one root that is specifically called the tap root. And that tap root will go down 30 to 35 feet into the earth to locate its own water level. And when it finds it, it brings it up and uses it. The comfrey roots as they spread out, this is where our reproduction of comfrey comes from, is from the root. The seed will never do you any good. It's like the potato. It has to be from the root. And so you can cut the comfrey root into 1 or 2 inch lengths. So there's a little knob in between, and the bark is all the way around it. And each of those will make a comfrey plant. And it grows and grows and grows.
Doctor, if you buy comfrey from the herbalist, root, it's usually chopped up in about, just very tiny pieces. Do you think those would grow if you tried planting them?
Yes, I think they will. If they are long enough that they've got the bark all the way around them.
Okay.
This comfrey, it multiplies so rapidly. But one thing, if you're going to grow comfrey, always see that there is no blossom on it. When it starts to bloom, cut that bloom off. The seed is no good, but what the bloom does, it makes thicker stalks and narrower leaves. And you don't have as good a protein reproduction. So be sure that you have got your comfrey under control. Now, comfrey is one of our deep root plants that is in the expression we use weeds in your garden. This sounds kind of crazy, but weeds in your garden is extremely important because time of drought, when there is no water, your deep-rooted ones are the ones that we need. There is comfrey, there is alfalfa, there is marshmallow, there is the dock, which is the burdock and the yellow dock and different docks. All right, we plant these around in our garden, and the roots go down 3, 4 feet, 30 feet, whatever it needed, and that brings up the water to the surface. And when it brings the water up to the surface, this is irrigating. But how are we going to control it? Because it goes right out into the air. This is the key of mulching, and we've got to learn to mulch. All right, we have our garden spot here. Now, we don't make it all deep root. There'll be deep roots here, 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 and here. And we mulch. And that mulch, as the water comes up, instead of going out into the air, it stays there underground and irrigates the rest of the plants. The carrots and the turnips and the beets and the peas and all the rest. So here is a perfect picture, a complete picture, if we will follow through with it. We worry now. Yes, but comfrey, boy, does it spread. Wow. It'll grow out of a house and home. Well, we keep our comfrey in a specific area. 8 foot by 8 foot or 12 foot by 12 foot. And as we harvest around the outside. And we keep this in a specific area. The marshmallow the same, the alfalfa the same, the red clover the same. Each of them, they are deep-rooted, and so we don't let them spread. Now, I hope that answers that question, yes.
Just a comment on comfrey as a fertilizer. In England, a lot of organic gardeners they grow a lot of comfrey. They put it in a 45-gallon drum with water and cap it for a couple of weeks. And then they use it for fertilizer in the garden. It's remarkable.
Yes, the English have a program that is great. I have my publications coming in from England monthly from Doubleday, and they have some of these terrific keys, and of course they specialize on comfrey. Very few people know that comfrey is as great as it is. It was 1964 before it actually hit the Utah area to be planted. That isn't very far away. And in that time, we started to learn about comfrey. I got to tell you about a comfrey formula. Now, some of you already have used it, some of you know about it, but some of you don't. Yes?
Dr. Christopher, when we were doing research, we found that in the life of Samuel Thompson, he was going out to his father's homestead when he was 9 years old, and he had hurt his foot because he hated farm work, and I think he did it to get laid up. And so, and he just mentioned how he hates farm work. He'd never have a farm when he grew up. So his foot got infected and had gangrene in it, and he had his dad try all these various substances, and they had root doctors and herb doctors come, and nobody could seem to do it. And so he told his dad to go to a nearby place where soldiers had been camped 10 years ago and dig up comfrey root and use that on the foot. And that was the earliest I'd found it in the United States.
And that was your first, and that goes back to 18 what?
Samuel Thompson was born in 1769, so it would be the early latter part of the 18th.
Yeah. You know, folks, I'd be lost without Lotus. She's precious. She has done so much for us. I just think she's great. I think she's wonderful. Yes, comfrey. Let me give you a formula, which is the simplest formula, a formula that was given to me that I think should be in every home. And comfrey's so easy to get. I'll tell you a story, then you'll know how I got it. I was finishing my lecture series again in American Fork, Utah. And I think American Fork or Alpine, I don't remember, but a man and his wife came up to the podium, and they had between them a little boy about 10 years old. And that little boy had the biggest bandages on his hands I think I've ever seen on any adult or child. And he was holding them up like this. And they were just great big bandages. They had just come from the hospital. The father and mother told me this story. Their 10-year-old boy and his 10-year-old companion were playing with matches and gasoline. What a combination. And they roasted their hands just like you would in a bar pit. They were roasted. And the bones were sticking out. The nails were burned off. The tendons. I mean, it was a horrible looking thing. And at the hospital, they were told there's only two solutions. Number one, we cut the hands off at the wrist because they were both burnt up to the wrist. We cut the hands off at the wrist and we put metal claws on. Solution number two, which will take longer and more expensive, we will take these hands and do surgery on them, skin grafting. It'll take about a year. But at the end, they'll have their hands, but they will be unusable except as a claw. And they will be petrified like a claw. And we can do that. This one couple said, keep our boy here and go to work on him as soon as he can. They said it'll be days before we can get started on it. And so they put temporary bandages on both cases. This other couple said, well, we want to try something else first. And well, the doctor says, fine, try it out and then come back. We'll help you when you get ready. So they dropped down to see us. And they said, can you help us? Well, they took off one of the temporary bandages, and those hands looked horrible, third-degree burns with the bones sticking out and the flesh ready to fall off in places. I'd never had anything like this. I kind of inwardly panicked. But you know, the amazing thing was that it didn't jolt me. In the Army, I have sewn up many hands. In fact, in one day, I sewed up 3 hands of different men who had held a hand grenade too long in demonstrations and had blown the middle of their hands out. And this is a nasty job, sewing this up. But that part didn't bother me. But to think, a 10-year-old boy with no hands. And I offered that silent prayer again. And the answer came right now. Now, this was in 1968. And I knew such a little bit about Comfrey. I'd read articles on it, but we had very little to work with. And so all I knew was Comfrey was good. But the word came to me. And as it came, I told him to write it down. And it was for third-degree burns, cuts, bruises, abrasions. Take equal parts of honey and wheat germ oil. That's regular liquid honey and wheat germ oil. Mix thoroughly. Then add finely chopped or powdered comfrey root or comfrey leaf until it is a paste. And when it is in paste form, apply. Half, 3/4 of an inch thick over the entire area. And do not pull off, but as is being absorbed, add on to. Keep adding on. And that this would take care of any cuts, abrasions, broken bones, etc. I gave the full thing as it came to me. And they said, all right. and they headed out and did this. Well, I got reports back. In a matter of months, this boy's hands were as good as mine, with no scars, and the nails had grown back on again, which had been burned off. The tendons, everything was perfect, and he had good hands. The other boy, which was identical in damage in the third-degree burns, was left in the hospital, and what had happened was it took a little over 1 year in the hospital, continual surgeries, skin graftings. And when he came out at the end of a year, it had cost slightly over $150,000. And what did he have? 2 claws that were so ugly that they had to put gloves over them. And the boy became a recluse. He refused to go to school, to church, to parties. And he became addicted to television. He sat there. This is the story of 2 boys who had identical burns. This was in '68. I had told this story to many, and the formula spread. And then, in 1972, I was in Lansing, Michigan, and I was lecturing there, and I was telling this story. And a man at the back of the room after the week's lectures came up to the front when I had finished on a Friday night, because on Friday night I've finished my lectures and I'm about had it, and I always go back to my motel room and chaw on an apple and read something and unwind, go to bed and hit the plane for home next morning. Well, this man came up to the front and he said, "Dr. Christopher, here's a book." And he handed me a book. He said, "It's yours." Well, I said, "That's a nice book, and why is it mine? I had to give it to you. Why did you have to give it to me?" He said, "I just bought it today." And I'd started reading it, and it intrigued me. Some Frenchman had written it about the herbal formulas and herbs that had never been circulated in print, that were isolated in various areas, and he traveled over the world and picked up these formulas and picked up information on herbs. And he said, I got so excited about this book, but something kept saying all during the lecture, "Give it to Dr. Christopher. Give that book to Dr. Christopher." And he said, "It pesters me to a point that if I don't give it to you, I won't sleep." Here it is. And I said, "Well, thanks, put your name in the front," which he did. And he was a naturopathic physician. And he put his name in the front, put his card in. And so when I went back to the motel to unwind, I sat there chawing on an apple, and I went through the book. And I looked that this book had been published and printed in January of 1974. The formula was given to me in 1968, 6 years before. But as I flipped through, it told about an old formula from Germany that they had found that had never been printed before. And this was the first time it was ever in print in January of 1974 for third-degree burns, for all types of damage to the hands, equal parts of honey and wheat germ oil, thoroughly mixed and powdered or